Hello, everyone. Welcome. Good to see you. Thank you all for coming. Stephen, I'm sorry for being late. But God bless you all. We're in a very wonderful time of the year. It's seasonal, it's holy, it's religious, it's real, it's biblical. And what's happening now is it's really just a renewal. Springtime, everything about this renewal of year. During the winter, everything kind of withers away. Things get cold, things get bad. But now it's the sun is out and the blossoms are coming out, and we're seeing the newness of life, and it's truly a blessing. And the Torah is in tune and in touch with this. Obviously, God is the creator, so his holidays reflect the seasons and the agriculture. So as we find ourselves celebrating the exodus from Egypt. We left Egypt. This is amazing. This is a remarkable thing. Freedom. This is the new year. Exodus chapter 12, verse 2. This month is the first month to the months of the year. This is the new year. Contrary to popular Jewish belief that claims that the new year is Rosh Hashanah, Rosh Hashanah actually is the seventh month. It's the first day of the seventh month. It's also not called Rosh Hashanah. It's called the Day of Remembrance with the blast. We blow the horn. So the New Year is Passover. Passover is on the New Year. It's on the 14th day in the evening on the first month of the year, as God tells Moses and the Jewish people and the Israelites in the land of Egypt, you are going to be celebrating the New Year. So now that we're celebrating a new year, we're celebrating the renewal of the seasons, we're celebrating growth, we're celebrating the blossoming life that comes. We are celebrating freedom. And freedom is truly something to celebrate. Freedom is something that people have lived and died for thousands of years already. And as we celebrate freedom, it's important for us to discuss what the laws are regarding this holiday of Passover. And more specifically, because this comes up as well, how the traditions differ from the law. Because Passover, like the rest of the holidays and like the rest of the Torah, has been completely manipulated and glossed over by the rabbis. What the actual Torah says is long forgotten by the time you end the 25th book of the rabbis, telling you all the different laws and the details and the craziness that they go through. So first we'll start with what the Torah says, and we will also contrast what the Torah says with what the rabbis of the Talmud say. And you'll see that this is actually something that can give you freedom and not increase your slavery, which is the exact point of the holiday. So we are in the first month. The month is known as Nisan in the Jewish religion. It's not a Torah name, but that's how it's known in the Hebrew calendar. And just to address for a second the calendar, because I know there's like debates on that. I actually follow the Jewish calendar in this respect, and I find the Jewish calendar to be quite accurate, actually. And the thing is that there's no Torah obligation to follow a specific calendar. So really, if you are using a valid calculation that lands the first month of the year in spring, you're really in the clear. The reason why I like the rabbinic calendar is because it follows the moon, and the moon actually is on the lunar cycle is a monthly cycle that the moon is on. So I think that's no coincidence that the moon is literally on a monthly cycle. So following the cycle of the moon, we can calculate the months. And the rabbis also use the sun to account for the seasons. So the Hebrew calendar would be called a luni-solar calendar. It's lunar as well as solar, because the months are judged by the moon, but they use the solar calendar in order to align the lunar months with the seasons, because the moon, it seems, can get out of whack with the seasons. So by having what they call a leap year every few years, they're able to realign the lunar calendar with the solar calendar. Now, that seems to be a pretty effective calculation, and it works. So I don't think you have to throw everything out. If a couple aspects of Jewish tradition actually are workable, I don't see why we shouldn't utilize that. I think there's value to that. So according to the Jewish calendar, the Hebrew luni-solar calendar, Passover this year, so it's not going to fall out every year on the same day in the solar calendar. This year, it falls out on April 1st in the evening. So that's the first night of Passover. The 14th day of Nisan is April 1st. April 1st in the evening is the first night of Passover. And the last day of Passover is April 8th, that being the 7th day of Passover. So the first day is April 2nd, and the 7th day is April 8th. Passover is calculated from evening to evening, as we will see. You begin in the 14th in the evening, and you end on the 21st in the evening. So mark your calendars. And something to point out very clearly is that according to the Torah, there's no such thing as a 2-day holiday. This is something that the rabbis have really gone crazy with, this idea of a 2-day holiday. It's completely counter Torah. There's no basis in the Torah for doing a 2-day holiday. Absolutely not. The Torah is very explicit that this is a 1-day holiday. Now, this is a 7-day holiday, but the first day is a holy day, forbidden in work, and the 7th day is a holy day, forbidden in work. According to the rabbis, Passover is 8 days. The first 2 days are holy, forbidden in work, and the last 2 days. And this year they have what they call a 3-day holiday because they don't know how to manage time. They end up having a 3-day holiday where this year they're going to do Thursday, Friday, and Saturday because it goes straight into a Shabbat. Now, this is absolutely unnecessary. This is another example of the Jews self-inflicting suffering on themselves against what God wants them to do. Passover, the first day of Passover is 1 day. So this year it's going to be Thursday, the 2nd, and that's all that we should be doing. Someone commenting Hebrew propaganda, Sveika de Yoima, there's a doubt of the day. Well, we just finished talking about how there's actually no doubt of the day. There is a set calendar that is based off of the moon and the sun. It's a set calendar. The day is completely knowable. By all accounts, even according to Orthodox Jews, we now do know the date, yet they still continue to maintain a bunch of false rulings of rabbis from 2,000 years ago because they don't have the guts to actually oppose the rabbis and to change things, to change man-made laws, which is ridiculous because nowhere in the Torah are we told that we cannot change man-made laws that were wrong then and definitely don't apply nowadays, according to everyone. So yes, there is no. So Stephen's asking, was there a case of controversy over the date? Well, again, the case of controversy regarding the date is due to the fact that the rabbis said that you need to have a united calling of the beginning of the month, and they said that unless you have the high court proclaiming the new month, then you can't actually start counting in the new month. This is not even a Torah law. The Torah doesn't say you need to have the high court proclaim a new month. The new month is visible based off of the sky. Now, when the Israelites were exiled to Babylon, they would still wait to hear word from Israel, from the temple in Israel, in order to start the month in Babylon. Now, obviously, Babylon is far from Israel, so it would take a long time till messengers would come to Babylon in order to notify them about the new month. So because of this, they had a doubt in the day, so they just added an extra day to all the holidays. Curiously enough, they didn't add an extra day to Yom Kippur, of course, because who wants to fast for 2 days? But for the other holidays, they added 2 days, and so now we're stuck with 2 days, even though, by their own admission, we have a clear calendar today, and there's no doubt of the day, but they continue to uphold this false doubt based off of a rabbinic law from 2,000 years ago that doesn't even apply anymore by their own definition. So, I mean, this is just obviously not actually the case. And so let's talk about what is clear. And so let's read a couple passages from the Torah about what this holiday entails. So a good source for your reference is Exodus chapter 12. This is discussing the Exodus from Egypt, and Passover is being established as a holiday. So reading Exodus 12, 14 through 20, this day shall be for you as a remembrance, and you shall celebrate it as a holiday to Yahweh for your generations, an eternal decree you shall celebrate it. So already this disproves claims from people that claim that this is not an eternal decree, uh, people who want to go with Christianity, for example, that say that the holidays don't apply, or that these stuff don't apply. I mean, from a Torah perspective, this obviously applies. So if people want to be Torah observant, if people are the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and should be celebrating this as their history, that God saved them, absolutely, this is an eternal decree. This holiday should be celebrated for all generations. 7 days you shall eat unleavened breads. However, on the first day you shall cease all leavening from your household, because whoever eats leavened products, that soul will be cut off from Israel from the first day until the seventh day. So this is a complete 7-day period. First day to the seventh day, that is the holiday of Passover. For those 7 days, you must not have any leavening, any leaven agents, any leavened products in your house. A leavened product cannot be in your house for 7 days. On the first day is a holy calling, and on the seventh day is a holy calling. So very clearly we can see you should have the first day holy and the seventh day holy. Now here marks a difference between the holidays and Shabbat, for example. You should not do any work. However, what can be eaten for every soul, that alone you can make for yourself. So you actually are allowed to cook. What everyone needs to eat on the holiday, you are allowed to cook. So this is a very interesting point, by the way, because on Shabbat we're told you should cook on the sixth day, but on the holiday we're told that you actually can cook. And so these prohibitions regarding Shabbat, we have explicit prohibitions restricting your activity to a high extent. You cannot cook, you cannot leave your place, you cannot burn a fire. This does not apply on the holiday. On the holiday, you are allowed to do these things. Now, when it comes to rabbinic Judaism, we have some sort of in-between thing for the holidays, which they say, well, you're not allowed to burn a fire. Well, you're not allowed to kindle a fire, but you are allowed to burn a fire if it's pre-existing. But on Shabbat, you're not even allowed to burn a pre-existing fire. This standard makes absolutely no sense, because the law in the Torah is you shall not burn a fire. Right? So if the law is you should not burn a fire on Shabbat, and Passover is like Shabbat, then you cannot kindle or burn a fire. But if Passover is not like Shabbat and you could burn a fire, then you can also kindle a fire. So in Orthodox circles, they'll be looking for a pre-existing fire in order to cook, or in order to light their candles or anything, or you light a cigarette. So they're always carrying around little flames, and so they light these 24-hour candles or 48-hour candles, and they're always trying to get that pre-existing flame. The whole pre-existing fire thing is complete bullshit. It makes absolutely no sense. If you are looking for if you are allowed to use fire on the holiday, then it doesn't matter whether you kindle or burn. And if you're not allowed to use fire, then you can't even use a pre-existing fire, because again, the commandment by Shabbat is do not burn a fire. Now, again, it's very clear when you look at that verse in Exodus 35, it's very clear that that's referring to the Sabbath of the seventh day. So actually, you are allowed to use fire on the holiday, and it doesn't matter whether it's pre-existing or not. That's completely irrelevant. It makes absolutely no sense. Hadassah is saying she likes to make her own unleavened bread. Great. It's very easy. You just make your dough and don't let it rise, and don't add yeast or any leavening agents into it, and just bake it right away. And voila, it's unleavened. You definitely don't need to buy it from like some special rabbinic bakery. Steven saying, can we garden on Passover? I like that. Question. I mean, again, like just something to keep in mind, that the holiday is more about leisure and enjoyment than the Sabbath is. The Sabbath has great restrictions on work. The holiday specifically specifies in most locations, do not do any laborious work. So it actually specifies labor as defining the work, but you're able to do a lot of things on the holidays that you're not able to do on Shabbat, like leave your place, like burn a fire, like cook. So, there is a possibility that if your gardening is very leisurely, you'd have an easier time doing that on the holidays than on Shabbat, for example. Someone's commenting that the matzahs need to be cooked in 18 minutes. Of course, that's not true. There's absolutely no source for the 18-minute rule on Passover. 18 minutes is a completely arbitrary, ridiculous number. And actually, as we'll see shortly, the Israelites carried their dough out on their backs, and they baked the bread after they were carrying it on their backs for obviously longer than 18 minutes. So 18 minutes makes no sense whatsoever. Bread will not leaven even if it's held for longer. But overall, the idea that you should bake your bread immediately so it doesn't have any time to rise is not a bad idea. but the neurosis of 18 minutes is, again, ridiculous. And this is something we'll see as well. The rabbis create arbitrary numbers, arbitrary definitions, and then they enforce that as law on the people, and that's not good. So as we continue here in Exodus 12:17, it says, you shall guard the matzot, you shall safe keep this commandment of having the unleavened breads. For on this very same day I took out your legions, so the great numbers of Israel were taken out of the land of Egypt, and you shall keep this day for your generations as an eternal decree. So again, repetition, eternal decree. On the first month, on the 14th day of the month in the evening, you shall eat unleavened breads until the 21st day of the month in the evening. So again, setting up the holiday of Passover from the 14th day of the month in the evening until the 21st day of the month in the evening. That's a 7-day period, but it's going from an evening to evening basis, and that's explicit on Passover that's how we should count. It's also explicit on Yom Kippur that we should count from the 9th day of the month in the evening till the 10th day of the month in the evening. The other holidays and Shabbat are not specified to be evening from evening. Therefore, it would actually make sense to observe them from morning to morning. But for these holidays, we're explicitly saying go from evening to evening. And that's obviously, for Passover, it's very simple. Why that's the case is because we were taken out of Egypt historically on the 14th of the month in the evening. So we're celebrating a historical event that took place on the 14th day of the month in the evening. 7 days, no leavening shall be found in your household. For all that eat leavened products, then that soul will be cut off from the community of the children of Israel, whether they're from the sojourners or the native of the land. So again, this is the law of the land. For 7 days, there cannot be any leavening. You cannot eat any leavened products in all of your dwelling places. You shall eat matzot. You shall eat unleavened breads. So this is a topic we have to sit here and focus on for a second, which is what exactly is the definition of chametz? Okay, so there's two terms for leavening. There's seor, which refers to the leavening agent itself, and then there's chametz, which refers to the product that has been leavened by the leavening agent. Now, we have to discuss a few things here, which is that, first of all, when we say leavening agent, what kind of leavening agent are we referring to? Are we referring to all leavening agents? And when we say chametz, like something that's been leavened or fermented, really, fundamentally, chametz also means fermented. Does that mean everything that's been fermented? Because then we can get into beverages like beer and whiskey, or even beverages like wine. Wine is leavened with yeast. You may not know that. Most products are fermented to some degree, especially if it's pickled or cheese or something like that. So clearly, we have to understand, what are we referring to when we talk about leavened products, and what are we referring to when we talk about leavening? Now, everywhere in the Torah that we see this topic of leavened bread, it's referring to bread, all right? And it's very clearly talking about bread. And the rabbis, what they've done is, again, they've created an arbitrary list, and the arbitrary list is 5 grains: wheat, spelt, oat, rye, and wheat and barley. Those are the 5 grains. So wheat, barley, spelt, oat, rye, 5 grains, and that's it. 5 grains. That is what's included in chametz. That's what those grains are what we're referring to. And so to them, it's all about those grains. And so even if you have those grains in a beverage, for example, fermented in a beer or a whiskey, then you're not able to have that. But for example, what's very common in rabbinic circles is to enter into a Passover party with a big cake. And you say, well, how can you have this big cake or this big loaf, or how is that possible to eat this on Passover? Well, they say, oh, we made it with potato flour. So because it's made with potato flour and we leavened this dough of potato flour, now it's fine. Now, I want to make the argument to you that in the Torah, chametz and seor is specifically referring to bread-related leavening, because every time that leavening is mentioned, it's mentioned regarding bread. In fact, matzah itself is referring to unleavened bread. So we're contrasting: eat unleavened bread, don't eat leavened bread. And so the whole idea of chametz is referring to bread and cakes and cookies, specifically when you put a leavening agent into a dough and leaven that dough. Now, regarding the leavening agent itself, you have ancient forms of leavening. Forms of leavening were done with what is modernly called a bread starter, where they would take actual dough and they would turn that dough into yeast. Now, that dough itself is leavened. But however, modernly, if you were to use something like yeast or baking soda or baking powder, those leavening agents in and of itself, they're not leavened. So although you could not put yeast or baking soda or baking powder into a dough to make it leaven, because then the dough would be leavened, the leavening agent itself is not leavening. So if you have yeast or baking soda, baking powder in your pantry, you don't have to dispose of that on Passover because those are not actual leavened products. They're just agents that are not leavened products. But if you have a bread starter, which is actually a leavened product in and of itself, then that would be something that you have to dispose of. In addition to that, any dough that is leavened, that has to be disposed of before Passover. So this is, again, something that's explicitly related to dough and to bread. And we can read this very clearly here in Exodus chapter 12, verses 33 through 42. So let's read it, and we'll read about the Exodus from Egypt, and we'll see how the entire story of the matzah versus the chametz is a question of bread, right? So Exodus 12:33, Egypt strengthened very greatly against the people, hurrying to send them away from the land because they said, we're all going to die. So the people lifted up their dough before it could actually turn into leaven, before it could rise. They tied their kneading bowls on their clothing and put it on their shoulders. And so they left. They left before their dough had time to rise. And the children of Israel did as the word of Moses, and they asked Egypt for all of their silver vessels and gold vessels and clothing. So the Israelites left Egypt with all the possessions, the pricey treasures of Egypt. And Yahweh gave the favor of the people in the eyes of the Egyptians, and they asked, whatever they asked for them, they took from Egypt. Now, the Israelites journeyed from Ramses to Sukkoth. It was about 600,000 men on foot, and that's besides for children. And also a mixed multitude went up with them, as well as sheep and cattle and great livestock. And what's interesting, that great mixed multitude seemingly is referring to a mixed multitude of people that were not native Israelites who also went up with Israel from the slavery, and they became integrated as part of the people. The rabbis say that this Erev Rav, this mixed multitude of people, were the cause and the source of all evil in the desert. So, for example, it was the mixed multitude that caused the golden calf, and it was the mixed multitude that caused the problem with the spies, where they said, "Oh, God can't take us into the land of Israel." So they blamed the mixed multitude of non-native Israelites for all their problems, which is very characteristic of the rabbis to blame non-Jews for their problems, as opposed to realizing that they are the cause of their own problems. But actually, the Erev Rav, the mixed multitude of people, are not referenced as being evil at all. In fact, you can view them as righteous because they saw the truth of the God of Israel, and they wanted to join along with the people. Anyhow, we continue here, verse 39, Exodus 12:39. They baked the dough that they brought out of Egypt into matzah cakes, unleavened cakes, because they did not have time to rise and become leavened. For they were driven out of Egypt, and they could not wait, and they also had no provisions made. So they had nothing ready to go. They had to run out immediately. There was no time to waste. And so their bread didn't have time to rise, and they immediately baked it right away. Now, the time that the children of Israel dwelled in Egypt was 430 years. Now, something to point out there, by the way, according to the rabbis, the Israelites were not in Egypt for 430 years. They say something like 100 or something years based off of some ridiculous calculation. The Torah explicitly says that they were there for 430 years. God promised Abraham that his children would be slaves for 400 years. So the 30 years would be the 30 years when Israel came to Egypt under Joseph. They were living freely. And probably about 30 years after Joseph passed and everything, that time period, then there was 400 years of straight slavery. So at the end of 430 years, on that very same day, all the legions of Yahweh left the land of Egypt. So all of Israel came out. It is a night of protection for Yahweh as he took them out of Egypt. That is the night that is a night of protection for Yahweh, for all the children of Israel, for their generation. So Passover is a night of protection. It's a night of safekeeping. God is keeping us with him, and we're so fortunate to be his children. Now, again, to point out in these specific two verses, verse 34 and 39 of Exodus 12, we're seeing an emphasis on the story of the bread. The entire story of the chametz, of the dough, it's a story of bread. Even when you go into the priestly stuff with the tabernacle, we're always talking about bread. they have the bread for the priest and don't make chametz. This leavened is always in reference to bread. So I think it's absolutely sound to say that the chametz that the Torah is referring to is chametz that is bread / cakes, specifically dough that has been risen by a leavening agent, or through time, over an extended period of time, that dough has risen. That is actually what the holiday is about. So the idea, for example, that you would have to get rid of beverages like whiskey or beer, they say, get rid of soy sauce because there's like flour in there. That's not actually what the Torah is talking about. The Torah is talking about bread. So you get rid of leavened bread and cakes, and you can keep anything that is not leavened bread. So I think it's a very important point to see here, that the Torah is specifically referring to something that is leavened. And as far as the leavening agent, the only leavening agent that is leavened itself is a bread starter that is actually made out of flour and water that's leavening and constantly leavening, could even leaven other things. But if you're talking about just like basic yeast, if you're not going to use the yeast, or baking soda, baking powder, if you're not going to use them to leaven dough, then you can have those agents in your house because they are not leavened themselves. They're just used to leaven. So you can't use them to leaven, but you can have those agents themselves. So this is a very great thing to know, because this problem here leads people to see, for example, if you have like whiskey in your house and now you're like, oh, I got to get rid of this. Well, you're not just going to pour out like a $300 bottle of whiskey. And so these kind of things, they cause a problem, because the problem is now, how do I get rid of this? And so the rabbis, they have a loophole for the laws that they created, as always. And the loophole is, let's sell it to a goy, right? And I've been present at these sales. This is a absolute mock sale. It's a complete joke. They go to the goy and they take him and they're like, oh, here's all our chametz. It's yours. Now it's yours. And okay, now it's mine. Okay, now it's yours. All right, we'll see you in a week and you'll give it back to us, right? So, I mean, that's absurdity. Like, what are you talking about? The Torah literally says you can't have chametz in your possession. And they're like, well, it's not technically in my possession. Oh, it shouldn't be found in your house. Well, it's in my house, but, it doesn't belong to me because I gave it in a mock sale to a goy. This is really, really stupid, like absolutely stupid. And the reality is, if we define chametz just as leavened bread or leavened dough or leavened products, then all you have to do is dispose of your leavened bread, like eat it up, and whatever's not left, get rid of it. Now, when it comes to getting rid of it, there's another question, like, how do I get rid of it? Is it all my property or whatever? Well, you can put it in the trash. Now, if your trash can is on your property, you can just take that trash and put it out in the street. The rabbis say that you're obligated to go through this ritual of burning chametz. They call it biur chametz, burning chametz. Actually, nowhere in the Torah does it say you have to burn your chametz. It says you actually have to just get rid of it, and it should be out of your possession. So the fact that the rabbis are telling you to burn your chametz is not actually a biblical commandment. So let's just have a look at two useful sources here regarding getting rid of your chametz. The first source is Exodus 12:33. We read this, but we'll read it again. Sorry, it's Exodus 12:15. My bad. Exodus 12:15. 7 days you should eat unleavened breads. However, on the first day you should cease. So cease, stop having all leavening in your household. For whoever eats leavened products, that soul will be cut out from Israel from the first day to the seventh day. So from the first day to the seventh day, you have to have zero leavening in your house. You have to cease it. You have to stop it from being in your house. It doesn't mean you have to literally burn it in fire. It means you have to get it out of your house, right? And so another good source is 13:7, Exodus 13:7. We got this verse saying, eat matzot, eat unleavened breads for the 7 days, and no chametz, no leavening shall be seen to you, and it shall not be seen in all of your borders, right? So it cannot be in your house, it cannot be seen, it cannot be found, and it cannot be in all of your house, and in all of your household, and in all of your borders. So again, this is important to know, that you can't just like, again, like, I guess you can try to find a loophole and just hide it, but it's still found in your borders. Or you can have it in your house, but sell it to a goy in a mock sale and pretend that it's not there. Well, it's there, and I guess it's not yours because you did a mock sale, but you're not tricking anyone. We all know this is not a real sale. We all know that you're going to have this back after Passover, and the goy is just doing you a favor because you probably paid him enough. Now, this is really, really ridiculous. And so someone's saying, which grains is it? Well, here's the thing. No grains are specified. So the rabbis say it's just these 5 grains. But according to the Torah, it would be any grain. If you make flour out of any grain, and again, I would argue even potato starch, because even though potato is not a grain, you're making a loaf out of starch. You make this flour out of potatoes, and then you leaven it with baking soda, baking powder, and you show up to your Passover party with a big leavened cake, and you're like, well, it's not one of the 5 grains, so it's fine. Well, no, it's actually not fine. That doesn't make any sense. You're literally eating a leavened dough, but you're just saying that it's fine because it's not one of the 5 grains. So again, I think the 5 grains is completely arbitrary. There's other grains in the world. There's rice, there's corn, there's all different grains. You can pull up a list. There's more than 5 grains. So to say that it's just these 5 grains is actually has no basis in the Torah. So really, what you're looking for is grain that is not leavened, right? And the leavening process, again, specifically refers to taking dough and leavening that dough. And so if you're not dealing with leavened dough, even if you're dealing with these grains, even if you're dealing with the 5 grains, right? Matzah is made out of wheat, but matzahs can be eaten because it's not leavened. Now, something you might not know is that actually pasta is not leavened. Now, for someone that's a Jew, like, this will boggle your mind. Like, that means you can eat pasta on Passover because pasta is unleavened. And they say, well, when you cook it, it expands. It's like, oh yeah, but when everything expands when you cook it, that expansion is not leavening. That's again, it's not very smart. Like, if you cook an apple, it'll expand. So when you actually cook pasta and it expands, it's not leavening. It's just cooking. Pasta is unleavened. That's actually a remarkable fact. I don't think any Jew actually knows this, right? So turns out you can eat pasta on Passover. It turns out you can cook rice and you can cook corn. You just can't turn them into loaves and cakes and leaven that dough. That's the problem. The problem is bread, cakes, cookies, leavened dough. Okay, but if you're not leavening the dough, you can actually eat all these grains. You can eat the 5 grains: wheat, spelt, oats, rye. You can make oatmeal because you're not leavening the oats. The oats are raw. You're putting water in it. You're cooking it. Cooking is not leavening. So again, there's just a real misunderstanding of like basic logic. So now the rabbis have something called kitnius. Kitnius means they extended it to like corn, and they say, well, now you can't have corn and rice either, which, okay, but now they're saying you can't have corn syrup. So you can't have Coca-Cola because Coca-Cola has corn syrup. So you understand that syrup is not leavened bread, right? So much of this is just illogical, completely illogical. And we have to actually understand that corn syrup is not leavened bread. Pasta is not leavened bread. And whiskey is not leavened bread. Leavened bread is specifically when you take flour and you make a dough and then you leaven it with a leavening agent, or you let it sit for a very extended period of time until it leavens by itself. Other than that, you're not actually dealing with leavened bread. Now, that's a very important thing to keep in mind. And I suggest that everyone just understand that it's not as extreme as they're making it, because really all you have to get rid of is actually leavened bread and cakes. But if everything else you can keep. Now let's just talk about the retardation for a second, because it's almost too easy here. The rabbis say that you have to blowtorch your countertops, because seeped into your countertop is leavened bread. And they also say that you have to completely replace your dishes. So you have to have, not only do you have to have a meat dishes and dairy dishes, which is obviously, of course, not biblical and ridiculous, you also have to have Passover dishes. So you need a whole Passover kitchen. You need a Passover kitchen. You need to blowtorch your countertops. You need to pour hot water on everything. This is insane. Like, look at your granite countertop. Do you see unleavened bread in your granite countertop? Do you see unleavened bread in your metal spoon? You're being retarded. You understand? That's ridiculous. So let's just be very clear. You don't need to blowtorch your countertops. You don't need to replace your whole kitchen for Passover. This is completely ridiculous. You just need to get rid of your leavened bread. So that's it. All right. And again, when we talk about, even someone told me today, they're saying, can you have paper plates? Because they gloss the paper plates again with like cornstarch or something. Again, we're talking about leavened bread, not starch, not syrup. We're talking about leavened dough that's actually turned into bread/cakes. So yes, you can have plastic, you can have metal, you can have ceramic, you can have granite countertops. That is not leavened bread. It takes a high level of indoctrination and inability to comprehend basic facts of existence to think that your granite countertop somehow constitutes as leavened bread. Now, just to show you how irrational they are being, there's a Jewish tradition that says you're not allowed to buy milk and eggs on Passover. Okay, why? Why can't you buy milk and eggs on Passover? Milk and eggs are not leavened bread. Well, the reason is, what if they fed the chickens grain? What if they fed the cows grain and the grain gets leavened in their stomach, and now when they give you milk, the milk is somehow leavened grain? I mean, again, like, okay, obvious question. Before we even talk about the logical fallacy and the ridiculousness of claiming that eating, like, if a woman eats a tomato, is her baby now a tomato? Like, the two things are unrelated. What you eat and then what comes out of you is not. It's milk is a different substance than leavened grain. Besides for that obvious ridiculous miscalculation. But okay, but before Passover they weren't feeding them grain. So what's the difference? Like, before Passover they were feeding them grain, so it's fine if you buy it before Passover. But on Passover, then you. So again, this is not supposed to make sense. This is completely ridiculous. We're dealing with people that don't actually know how to think. We're dealing with people that don't actually know how to make basic calculations of reality. When you have eggs, eggs are not leavened bread. When you have milk, that is not leavened bread. Because they fed cows grains before they fed it to them, that doesn't mean that now you, like, this is not supposed to make sense. Now look, Ash, I'm sure you can confirm with Chabad. Chabad says that, and other Hasidic groups, they have this problem called gebrochts. Gebrochts means the broken pieces of the matzah. If the broken pieces of the matzah come in contact with water, these people are so primitive and stupid that when they see the matzah expanding from the water, they think that the matzah is leavening. Now, it's actually physically impossible for bread to leaven after it's been cooked. That's ridiculous. So they claim that you cannot put matzah in your soup, or you cannot make matzah balls even, which is like a Jewish staple, because they're so religious, right, that they're afraid that their matzah is going to leaven post fact. And so they're literally sitting there at the Seder, the Passover meal, eating matzah out of a plastic bag so that the crumbs don't fall on the water and come in contact with it and leaven. So again, we're talking about people who either don't know how to think or are crazy, but this is not Passover. Passover, again, is about freedom. It's about God's law. When you look at man's law, all you see is sheer insanity and doublespeak and loopholes and strangeness. Let's just talk about the facts here. Leavened bread or unleavened bread. That is the entire reality of Passover, and there's nothing else. Now, I want to transition to the Seder for a second, okay? Because the Seder is literally, the Seder means the order, okay? And so the same way that Pharaoh's taskmasters stood over the Israelites telling them what to do all day, the rabbis stand over you all day and tell you what to do. And so on the night of freedom, there is a rigid book that you have to read called the Haggadah. The Haggadah has about like 3 interesting things in there. Everything else is just garbage propaganda. It's just rabbinic brainwash for children. And they sit there and they make you do all of these ridiculous rituals and all of these strange ideologies. And so I'll just give you like some things that you have to know about. So there's the Seder plate. And on the Seder plate, you have matzah and maror. Okay, so those are biblical. But then you have the shank bone, which is a remembrance of the Passover lamb, and then you have the egg, which is remembrance of the Chagiga offering. I don't even know what that is. Okay, but this is not all in the Torah. So now you have the Passover Seder plate, and then they have rituals. You put the Seder plate on the table, and then you take it off the table, and then they have 3 matzahs, one for the Kohen, the priest, one for the Levite, and one for the Israelite, the regular Israelite. So they have 3 matzahs, and then they break the middle matzah, and then they hide it, and then they claim that you have to eat the matzah after you hide it, and that's somehow a commandment in the Torah. The afikomen, never mentioned in the Torah. And then they have these this rituals. You have to dip like parsley in salt water. And then they say you have to have 4 cups. You have to have 4 cups. No, you don't. You don't have to have 4 cups of wine. Just sounds like an excuse to drink. If you want to drink, drink. Don't make an excuse for it. And then they say there's the 4 questions. And so the kids ask these questions. So the first question is, why do we eat unleavened breads tonight? Okay, so that's a good question. The second question is, Why do we eat maror? Okay. And then the third question is, why do we lean? Would lean to the side. And so they have this law that you lean to the side because you're so free. It ends up usually turning out into like a terrible situation where you're trying to like balance your matzah and you're like drooling all over yourself because you have to lean to the side. And then they say also, which is obviously not a Torah law. And then they also say, well, why do we dip twice in karpas, which is the parsley in salt water, and maror in the charoset. Charoset is a completely traditional thing. It's not at all in the Torah. It's like they make this like date and almond walnut thing. So again, you're like teaching your children that there's no difference between rabbinic law and Torah law, and they have to ask these questions. And a woman actually told me that she went to a rabbi to ask about conversion, and the rabbi said, "Do you know the Manish Tana?" So the Manish Tana is these 4 questions, and the rabbi said, "The fact that you don't know the 4 questions, which is rabbinic propaganda for children, the fact that you don't know these 4 questions means that you're not a candidate for conversion." So again, rabbis want you to be deep in the actual propaganda of the rabbis. They don't want you to be in God's world. They don't want you to be focused on God's commandments. They want you to be focused on their commandments, and they want kids to do that as well. And so then they have this whole propaganda piece about the 4 sons, where they list 4 different questions in the Torah that sons can ask, and they say one is wicked, one is righteous, one is stupid, one doesn't know how to talk. And it's like, okay, the question that they claim the wicked one asks is not actually a wicked question in the Torah. It's a very reasonable question, and you're supposed to respond to him with. So it says, he says, "What is this work that you're doing? Like, what is this service?" He sees that we're performing this service. So this actually is explicit in the Torah. It's Exodus 12:26 and 27. So if your children say to you on that day, "What is this service to you? Like, what is the service that you're doing?" So you shall say, "This is the Passover offering that God has commanded us because he passed over the houses of the Israelites when he struck the Egyptians and he saved us. So we do this service for him." So it says, he asked, "What is this service to you?" And you should answer, "The service is the service that God commanded us to do what he tells us to do." In the Haggadah, they say this is an evil question. It's evil because he's saying, "What are you doing?" And so the answer is blunt his teeth and say that if you weren't there, you wouldn't have been redeemed. So again, seems very extra, very ridiculous. The Torah doesn't frame this as an evil question. And so no, we do not claim that this is evil. If you actually wanted to have a functional Seder night, if you wanted to have a functional read, if you wanted to read a book, read the Torah. My God, like, why can't these people ever read the Torah? Read the Torah. And actually talk about the narrative of the Exodus from Egypt and celebrate what the Torah says about it, not what the rabbis say. There was like a Mishnah, when should you say Yetzias Mitzrayim? When should you talk about the Exodus from Egypt? In the morning, in the night? I didn't know. And then you have these stories from the Mishnah and the Talmud, and you have all these different explanations and stuff like that. Again, this is not actual high-level engagement. Okay, this causes people to doze off. It causes people to have to read scripted prayer because that's what rabbinic Judaism is all about. Every holiday, you got to read through a whole book. Have your own conversation. You don't even have to read the Torah. You can read anything. You can talk. Just talk about freedom. Talk about God. Talk about what this night even signifies, what it must have been like for the Israelites who witnessed all these miracles, who were called by God to come and be his children and be his servants. And this is such a great time to be alive, and to waste it on scripted propaganda on the order of the rabbis really is you're doing a disservice to yourself and to your family and to your children. So I would say just completely disengage from what the rabbis tell you to do. If you want just 2 rituals that are actually mentioned in the Torah, you have Exodus 12:8. It says that you should eat the meat of the Passover sacrifice roasted in fire. So we don't do the Passover offering today, but you should eat matzah, the unleavened bread, along with bitter herbs. Okay. So you're eating unleavened bread and bitter herbs. And a good piece of advice for you guys, if you want to know a pretty bitter vegetable, that is the horseradish. Okay. A horseradish is extremely bitter. If you take a bite of that, you're going to start tearing up. It's going to, definitely give you that kick of bitterness. So if you want to have unleavened bread and horseradish or another bitter herb that you find to be bitter enough, that's all you're supposed to be doing. So you have that on Passover night on the 14th in the evening, which this year falls out on April 1st in the evening. You're going to have that. And then look at Exodus 13:8. It says, you shall tell over to your children on that day, saying, because of this matter, God has taken me out of Egypt, and I perform all of these things for him because of what he's done for me. So it's saying on this very day, on this day of the Passover, you should retell this story to your children and explain where this originates from and how this has developed. So the idea of retelling the story to your children and recounting the story on this very day is actually a biblical commandment. So as you can tell the story over to your children, if you don't have children, tell it over to your inner child. What's the whole idea of telling it over to your children? The idea is the child is the lowest common denominator of intellect. You have to make this story accessible even to the simplest of the minds, even to the most underdeveloped. This is a simple story. It's a story about our Creator who loves us enough to save us from a terrible situation, to understand the pain that we're going through, and to actually bring us to freedom in service of Him. And that's a great merit. It's a merit. It's a great opportunity. And again, it shouldn't be wasted. The Passover night should be a time of freedom for you. It should be a wonderful environment, and should actually just make us happy to be able to celebrate with God. Now, let's talk a second about the Passover offering, because if you look in Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 5, it says, you may not slaughter the Passover offering in one of your cities that God gives you. Rather, you must go to the place that God chooses to rest his name there, and there you shall sacrifice the Passover offering as the sun comes down on the appointed time when you left Egypt. So the Passover offering, like all offerings, like all sacrifices, is confined to the place that God chooses. The Torah set up a sacrificial system, including even the personal sacrifice of the Passover offering, that it must be done at the place that God chooses. Now, because we do not have the place that God chooses, we do not have an active tabernacle and an active priesthood and an active location that we know God has chosen. We cannot. We're told not to sacrifice the lamb outside of this situation unless we're actually there with God in his place that he chooses. So we're not going to be doing the Passover sacrifice. Now, there's this funny law. The rabbis say you're not even allowed to eat lamb on Passover night because it's going to look like you're doing the Passover sacrifice. Well, of course, that is not a law in the Torah. And actually, it doesn't look like you're making the Passover sacrifice if you just have lamb chops like made in the oven, okay? Because the Passover sacrifice requires the entire lamb to be roasted over the fire whole. I don't think anyone's going to think that you are having the Passover sacrifice if you just eat some lamb at your Seder. So if you want to eat lamb, you can eat lamb. If you want to eat steak, you can eat steak. Whatever you want, you can eat. Doesn't matter. But the point is that commandment, that rabbinic commandment saying that you cannot eat lamb, is really quite funny and obviously not true. So look, it's very clear. It's very clear what we're supposed to be doing. It's very clear that God actually has great plans for us for this holiday to really celebrate and appreciate what he's done. And I want to just point out a little bit about the process of redemption that brought the Israelites to the redemption of the Passover. And it requires really understanding the fact that God himself foretold the slavery in Egypt. And it's unclear exactly why the Israelites even deserved to be slaves to begin with. I mean, definitely the brothers of Joseph messed up with him, and that wasn't good. But I mean, come on, 400 years of terrible slavery. I can't really see a rational reason for that. And guess what? No rational reason is even given. And a great dark dread comes over Abraham as God tells him that his children are going to be strangers in a strange land, and that's just their fate. Okay? And that's something about life. And the book of Job does a good job telling this story as well, where Job is so sad and angry about how it's unfair the way he's being treated. And fair enough, he should be angry, but at the same time, God's response is, you don't understand. Stephen is saying here, it's part of God's path. God has a path. God has a plan that we don't understand. And you can either be a rebellious son of a bitch and be like, oh, God, you don't know what you're doing. What kind of God would do this? Or you can trust that God, who's obviously way smarter and way wiser and knows way more than you, that's actually someone that you should submit to, and you should submit your judgment to him. And what can you do? What can you do when you're in the depths of slavery? Like I want you to think about that for a second, because I think it's really relatable, and it's been relatable for all times and across all cultures and spaces, which is like very often we feel like we're in the pits of slavery and like we just can't get out, and we're subject to forces that are enslaving us and making us do things against our will and things that we don't want to do. Yet, what are we supposed to do about that? And there's not always something we can do. So have a look here at Exodus chapter 2, verses 23 through 25. It says, "It was in those many days that the king of Egypt died." Okay, so first of all, the death of the king um, means that his reign is over. The king who was infallible, especially in Egypt. Oh, Pharaoh. Pharaoh is like basically a god. In fact, all the gods' existence was dependent on Pharaoh, according to them. So, you can imagine when the king is alive and the king is there and he's causing all this ruckus and he's making everyone submit to him. There's a lot of fear, right? So the king is alive, and the Jews, I guess, they felt very intimidated by the existence of the Pharaoh. But once the king dies, there's a shift, because suddenly you start to realize, wait, if the king can die, then he's certainly not the most powerful. And if the king can die, then who's the real king? That's the king of the king, right? And that actually is what calls you to God. And I think that that's really the time we're in too. I think if you look at this generation and you look about how even like with the advent of the internet and every random guy's like running his mouth about the corruption of the system and the government, and they're not wrong, right? You start to see the corruption of the government, the corruption of the king. The king is dead, if you will, because we can see through the rulership, the dictatorship that's keeping everyone suppressed, whether it's the religious institutions or the government. As they suppress people can start to see, wait, okay, the king is dead. There's no actual real power here that's keeping this together. So who do we call out to now? Well, the children of Israel groaned from all of their labor, and they called out, and their outcry went up to God because of all of the labor that they were doing. So the Israelites, they were laboring, and they their prayer, it wasn't even a very sophisticated prayer, right? It was just it was groaning. It was the raw expression of, God, we need help, right? And as they cried out from the work and from this terrible slavery that they were in, God heard their outcry, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God saw the children of Israel, and God knew. So there's a process here. There's three points of God's taking note of the Israelites. God heard, God remembered, and God knew, right? And so as you see that God, he hears what's coming out of the Israelites. He hears their pain and he hears their suffering, and then he remembers and he says, well, I promised them a lot, and then he knew. And that's a very cryptic statement. God knew. But I think it means everything, because even people that are deists who believe in the existence of God, they don't believe that God knows us personally. They don't believe that God actually hears our prayers. They don't believe that God actually is real enough and close enough. But here we see that God hears and God remembers and God knows. He knows what we're going through. He knows who we are. He knows what he needs to do in order to save us. And what were we able to do at that time? Nothing other than just cry out, right? And it was a raw outcry. It reminds me of this story. It's a rabbinic story. It's a Hasidic story, actually, where the rabbis were in the shul. They were in the synagogue and they were praying all their sophisticated prayers. And then a shepherd came in and just started whistling, because that's what he knew. He would whistle to call to his sheep. And the people were trying to shut him up. And the rabbi said, let him whistle, because that prayer is more significant than all of your prayers put together. And I think there's a parable like that also in the New Testament, where Jesus is like, who's greater? Is it the guy who's boasting in front of the synagogue saying, I'm so good, I'm so great? Or is it the sinner who's standing there saying, I've sinned, please God, forgive me? The reality is that when people have raw forms of expression, even if they're in the depths of slavery, even if they're a pathetic creature, it doesn't matter. God wants truth. God wants us to express ourselves in truth. And when we can just be real about it, and we can just actually understand that God is our only hope and our only salvation, and the only one that we can truly call out to. When the king dies, which king really lives? That's God, right? God is the King of kings, the God of gods, the power above all powers, the one who we can turn to in all areas of our life, the one who hears, who remembers, and knows. And he actually is there for us. And this is something that we can really hold on to. And again, to remember the the maror, right? The maror is the bitter vegetable that we eat. But this term maror is also used in Exodus chapter 1, verse 14. It says that the Egyptians embittered their lives. They embittered the lives of the Israelites with, with harsh slavery, with mortar, which is cement, and bricks, and all the works of the field, all of the slavery that they enslaved them with burdens. So they placed many burdens on the Israelites, and they made their lives bitter. So we have that bitterness. We eat that bitter vegetable, and we recall the bitterness of slavery. And we recall the fact that if we don't have God's salvation, what is our hope? We'll be in the depths of slavery. We'll be abused by any power that can gain control over us. And even the matzah itself is called the bread of affliction. You can see that written in Deuteronomy 16, verse 3. It says, "Do not eat any leavened bread for 7 days. You should eat unleavened bread of affliction." Okay, so matzah is bread of affliction. It's not inflated, right? The whole idea of leavening is that it inflates it, right? You have this dough, you put it together, and then you inflate it, and it rises, and it's all puffed up, right? On Passover, we are remembering our affliction, how God afflicts us, and God puts us through bitterness and pain and affliction to actually tell us, you are in my hands. You understand? Like, through suffering, we come closer to God. That's undeniable. And as much as we try to run away from him, God is calling us back. And he's saying we actually have to be submitted to him. And we actually have to remember his commandments. And we have to remember what he wants for us. And the verse continues. It says, it's bread of affliction, for you left Egypt in an instant, right? And you didn't have time for the bread to rise. So you think about that for a second. We think about the freedom and we're like, oh, that's so glorious. God just took us out of freedom. We were waiting for so long. But think about this. Imagine you have to leave right away. You don't have time to pack up. You don't have time to, put your affairs in order. You're out overnight, right? So freedom is not always that easy, right? Freedom is uncomfortable. Suddenly, you just got to go free, and you got to leave. You got to leave everything behind, and you got to go where? To the wilderness, out into the desert. It's not like God snapped his fingers and brought the Israelites to the promised land. No, there was a journey, there was a process. They had to completely submit themselves to God. If it wasn't enough that they were afflicted for 400 years in slavery, now they were going to be afflicted in the desert. And now they'd have to rely on God for food and for water and for shelter and for protection and for everything. As God continuously pushes us to submit to him, to actually acknowledge him, and to understand where everything comes from, where our very existence comes from, where all of our food and our clothing and our relationships and the very breath that's in our nostrils, it all comes from God. And for us to deny that would be the biggest crime. So God is putting us through this so that he can free us from a human tyrant, so that we may be servants to him, right? Freedom doesn't just look like, oh, I'm free now. I used to have to do what Pharaoh wanted. Now I can do whatever I want. No, that's just worship of the self. Doing whatever you want, you're just worshiping yourself. So you worship Pharaoh, now you worship yourself. No, you didn't accomplish much. Worship God. Do God's will, and then you'll be truly freed. That's actually very, very important. That's so vital to our remembrance, so that we can remember, so that we can know, so that we can hear God, and so we can return the favor, because God has done so much for us. He's done everything for us. And for us to actually turn back to God in faithful observance of his commandments, to be connected to him, to appreciate this holiday of freedom, to appreciate this month of Aviv, the renewal of the springtime, the renewal of the seasons, the freedom that God is calling us to. It's truly marvelous. And yes, even if it means that we afflict ourselves with this matzah, even if it means that we get rid of all the inflated breads and all the great cakes and everything, doesn't matter, because we're in God's hands, because we'll follow God out into the barren desert if we have to, as long as we can be with him. And that's the beauty. And so when we talk about all these insane laws of the rabbis and all these crazy details that they're putting on the Jews, that just sounds like more slavery. You used to have to listen to Pharaoh. Now you have to listen to Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yochanan and all these rebbes. No, you don't have to listen to rebbes. You have to listen to God. God is clarifying for us exactly what he wants from us. He says, celebrate this on the first day, and on the seventh day is a holy day, no work. You can cook, you can use fire, you have more freedom of movement. The holiday is not exactly like the Sabbath, but ultimately for 7 days, you get rid of all leavened bread, get rid of all leavened cakes, and you just eat the unleavened bread, and you celebrate. You celebrate the celebration of freedom. You celebrate the fact that You can be stripped of all of your physical comforts, and you can still be in a state of bliss because you're with God, because you have received that freedom from God. So thank God we have so much to be grateful for. We have so much to remember as we retell this story to our children, to our inner child, as we make this accessible and understandable to even the simplest among us, to actually understand what it means to be freed by God, what it means to be subservient only to Him, to be reliant only on Him. That is true freedom. That's what God is calling us to do. And I wish you all a blessed Passover, a beautiful holiday. May you keep it exactly as the Torah writes. Read up on these sources that we discussed. See them inside for yourself. See the clarity that the Torah gives us, and remember that God is always with us.